Venus, as we all know, is our goddess of love. And Venus, from a traditional perspective, is also associated with the goddess Aphrodite, who we definitely know is the goddess of love. When we take a look at the glyph of Venus, the ancients had several thoughts regarding how this glyph mystically described what Venus is meant to represent. On the one hand, we have some ancient astrologers saying that the glyph of Venus is meant to look like the Ankh of the Egyptian goddess Isis. Because Isis represented to a very large degree our archetypal and primordial mother, and therefore her glyph, the Ankh, is representing also the highest spiritual expression of femininity. Therefore, within the glyph of Venus, we do see the Ankh symbolized, which is, in a sense, a nod to the teachings of ancient Egypt. But one of the things that's interesting about the glyph of the Ankh is that the glyph of the Ankh is also meant to represent a key towards immortality and a key towards immortal life. And so, in a very real way, we can think about Venus and the principles that Venus represents as also being principles tied in with this larger concept of the immortalization. However, beyond this idea that the glyph of Venus is associated with the Ankh, we get this other idea emerging from within the heart of Western mysticism, in which the glyph of Venus is essentially the glyph of the sun surmounting the cross of matter. And when we have the glyph of the sun surmounting the cross of matter, it says that our soul, as a primary principle, is informing completely how we exist and how we establish ourselves on the earth. Whereas within Mars, there was this restlessness of the soul principle to strive towards something above and beyond the earth, which is why in the classical glyph of Mars, we have the sun glyph at the bottom of the cross, which is symbolizing that we, through the vehicle of our physical bodies, are constantly striving to be and become something else. We're constantly striving to attain some higher height that we haven't yet attained. Venus's glyph is different, because in the glyph of Venus, we find the sun glyph surmounting the cross of matter, and we find that cross of matter firmly planted upon the earth. So whereas, in a sense, Mars is meant to take us out of this earth in pursuit of something greater than that which is earthly, the Venus glyph is meant to solidify and meant to bring down the lightning of our soul force and ground it into our earthly experience so that we can know the face of God through this earth element. And that is why we associate Venus with beauty and art and pleasure and softness and honey and flowers and all of the things that allow us to imbibe our earthly experience with a set of intrinsic values that go beyond the actual reality of the physical earth element. Venus as a concept is meant to give us this sense of pleasure within our existence here upon the earth, which is why within the Kabbalistic Tarot, the Empress card is the card that we associate with the planet Venus. We see the Empress card and we see, very much like the glyph of Venus, in which we are rooting our solar power into the physicality of the earth element. The Empress looks like a fixture upon the earth. She looks stabilized. She looks in every way content in where she is. She looks like she has no intention to move from her seat whatsoever. And that's because this Empress card is meant to give us a sense of being able to find expressions of our solar power, being able to find expressions of soul force while we exist within this earth. Because those expressions of that soul force are meant to remind us of that within us which is not physical. This seems like a bit of a contradiction, because previously when we learned about Saturn, we heard that the earth element really only within ourselves reinforces the reality of the earth element, which means that once we find ourselves living on earth, everything within the earth tends to reinforce the heaviness of the reality of being in a physical body. But Venus is also coming as a complement to that Saturnian principle and saying even these things of material form can lead us to a sense of the eternal. Even these things that exist within this material plane can lead us towards the face of God. I'm reminded of a story of this Christian conqueror within the early foundations of the Christian church. And he was charged with sacking and burning all of the pagan temples. And when he went to sack and burn the temple of Jupiter, and he stepped inside of the temple, and he looked up at the ivory and golden face of Jupiter that the ancients had carved, he dropped his swords and he dropped to the floor and he wept. Because even though that image of Jupiter was in no way the actual god Jupiter, seeing the beauty of the artistic rendition of that image of Jupiter struck such a chord of awe within himself that he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was standing in the presence of the representation of the eternal. She represents the way in which all of nature is the temple of God. She represents the way in which art can be used as a vehicle for us to come in contact with that which is not physical. Venus represents this concept of awe. And that feeling of awe is something that can arise within us wherever we are. That feeling of awe is a feeling that arises within us when you step inside of an ancient temple. It's something that arises within you when you step inside a grove of forest trees. It's something that arises within you when you step into a museum and you behold the art of the ancient world. This feeling of awe is a feeling that strikes the very heart of who we are, and it lets us know that beyond the physical representation of what we're seeing, there is a ghost within the machine. There is something within this thing that is connected to that which is greater. There is something within this vehicle or within this representation of divinity that is also connected to that which is divine. And it strikes a chord of remembrance within all of us that lets us know that even while we live within this earthly body, we are all within ourselves still deeply connected to the divine. And so Venus is representing something quite different from what Mars is representing. Mars is representing this restless desire within all of us to grow away from where we've begun, to grow away from how we've started, to go on a voyage, to go on a conquest, to go on a mission, to go out into the world, to find elsewhere within the world that which we desire. Whereas Venus is saying to us, everywhere around you is the Holy Land. Everywhere around you, you are standing in the presence of God. Everywhere around you, you are in the presence of the eternal. And no matter where you go, you can put your head to sleep on a rock at night, and the very sky above you is the temple of the eternal. Venus is representing the ways in which things of beauty directly strike a chord within us regarding that which is eternal and that which is everlasting and that which is truly divine. So whereas Mars takes us out of ourselves into the world to search for that which we seek, Venus is saying if you sit right where you are at this moment, surrounded by the earthly things around you, you will find that the presence of God is everywhere. Within the Corpus Hermeticum, we're told that the spiritual part of who we are descended through the stellar shells of the 7 classical planets of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, and the Moon, and descended to the sphere directly above the earth element. In the Corpus Hermeticum, Book 1, verse 14, we read that he, the luminous spirit, of the individual being, looked down through the harmony of the cosmos, and having broken through the sovereignty of the divine power, he showed to downward moving feminine nature the beautiful form of God. When she had seen this beauty, which never satiates of him who had in himself all the energy of the powers and the form of God, she smiled with love, because she had seen the image of the most beautiful form of man in the water and his shadow upon the earth. He, seeing in himself a similar form to his own in the water, fell in love with her and wished to dwell there. No sooner wished than done, and he inhabited a form without speech. Nature, having taken her beloved into herself, enfolded him completely, and they united, for they loved each other. So what we're seeing within the Corpus Hermeticum is that this idea that man is composed of two natures, or that the human being is composed of two natures, a body of fire and a body of this dark, earthly flesh substance, we see the origin of this story within the Corpus Hermeticum, because he goes on to say in verse 15, "For this reason, of all beings on earth, man alone is double, mortal because of the body of flesh, and immortal because of the real internal substance that dwells within." Love is essentially under the governance and under the dominion of Venus. And this love is the love that caused us all to be embodied within this physical form. And it is this same love of Venus that essentially causes us to realize that there is beauty to be found in this earth element, and that causes us to realize that the earth element can also be a gateway towards us seeing the face of the eternal. The ancients struggled with this for a long time. For the ancients, they weren't really sure what to do with the earth element. They didn't know if the earth element was something nasty and dirty to be discarded, as in the case of the Mars glyph, where we find ourselves trying to run away from those seminal substances out of which we were created, or whether or not the earth element was something for us to cherish and protect and be the stewards of and be in love with, as realizing that the earth was also a vehicle of the eternal. Venus is telling us that indeed this earth is both a gateway and the vehicle of the eternal, which is a part of why we should not only take care of our physical body, but we should also take care of the earth itself. This leads to another thought that we find within Jewish mysticism, and that thought is this notion of tikkun, or repair. Within Kabbalah, it is said that when God or Hashem first created the world that he first created did not have the ability to hold the fullness of his infinite light. And as a result of that, this world broke into 10,000 shards. And traditionally speaking, whenever we see the word 10,000, it doesn't necessarily mean 10,000, it just means an infinite amount of shards. And it's said that this initial world broke into 10,000 shards, and that it is our job as human beings to reconstitute the first world. And it is our job as human beings to rebuild this world and to bring together within ourselves these shards of this broken world so that we can repair the world that has been destroyed. And this repairing of the world is indeed an act of love. Within the Kabbalistic Tarot, the esoteric name of the Two of Cups is the Lord of Love. And it's called the Lord of Love because this card is associated with the decan of Venus in Cancer, which is the first decan of that sign. Within this card, we see two people exchanging in reciprocal love. But not only are they exchanging in reciprocal love, but we also see that that love is presided over by the very flaming substance of the eternal. Within this card, we see the winged head of the lion, and that is meant to represent the presiding power of the force of fire over all of our operations within this material world. And what this card says is that love isn't just something that takes us closer to one another, but love is something that also reveals to us more fully the face of the divine. Which is why within the tarot card that most of us associate with love, which is the Lover's card, we also see in that card an angel presiding over the lovers within that card. Within the Lover's card, within the Kabbalistic tarot, we see the way in which love is also a path towards the infinite and the everlasting fire of the eternal, which is the source out of which all of us as individual souls derive our intrinsic power and fuel within this lifetime. Within this card, we see that the man in the card is looking towards the face of the woman, and he's having his desires met within the face of the woman, but we see that that woman, which is largely representing Venus within this card, is looking upward towards the face of the archangel, because she knows that even in the process of love, and even in the process of love making, that there is a moment within that process in which we all see the face of God. And for some of us, when we are operating purely from our animalistic nature and purely from the Martian part of ourselves that only knows how to go out into the world and conquer and has a hunger that is never satisfied, we might only truly see the face of our beloved in the process of exchanging in an act of love. But beneath that act of physical satisfaction, we also are given this glimpse, this euphoria, this ability to see beyond that which is our physical bodies, and we're given this ability to see the face of God. And that glimpse of the face of God, which is represented in the Lover's card, is something that is held within the Glyph of Venus. Because the Glyph of Venus tells us that all acts of love and all acts of pleasure and all acts of beauty and every creation of art has the ability to take us back towards the eternal. Within the Corpus Hermeticum, in Book 5, verses 4 and 5, we read, which for me is really a powerful prayer to Venus, and a powerful acknowledgement that all acts of beauty within this cosmos are meant to take us back to God, and they're also meant to remind us of the influence of the eternal within all of our affairs. We read in the Corpus Hermeticum that this great bear turns around itself and carries the whole universe along with itself. Who has acquired that as an instrument? Who has thrown boundaries round the sea? Who has set the earth in place? For there is someone, O Son, who is the creator and master of all these things. It is impossible that the place, the number, and the measure be preserved without him who created it. For all order is created, and what is out of place and out of measure is not created. But even that then, my son, is without a master. For if the disorder is in need of order, when, so to speak, it stops the normal workings of order, it is nevertheless under a master, albeit one who has not yet brought it within the bounds of order. Oh, that you can grow wings and fly up into the air, and that, poised between the earth and heaven, you might see the firmness of the earth, the liquidity of the sea, the course of the rivers, and the free flow of the air, the piercing fire, the revolution of the stars, the swiftness of the heavenly movement encircling all these things. What most blessed vision, O Son, to behold all that in one moment, the unmoving being moved, the unmanifest being made manifest through what it creates. That is the very order of the universe, and this is the beauty of the order. Within the Corpus Hermeticum, we see evidence that beauty is indeed a pathway by which we can all remember where we came from, and by which we can all remember the true source of our origin. And to this end, Venus is, yes, indeed the goddess of pleasure, but she's also a goddess who is meant to show us that even as we exist within this earthly world, we're meant to use this earthly world as a launch pad for our deepest, most sincere spiritual explorations. The ancients tell us that within the human embryological cycle, Venus is associated with the fifth month of pregnancy. Because the ancients tell us that Venus is responsible for completely establishing the gender of the baby, but that Venus is also responsible for establishing the exact measures of the body of the baby. Venus is responsible for giving beauty to the fetus, for giving a sense of harmony between the facial features on both sides of the face of the baby. Venus is responsible for giving us this sense of form and poise and being well made. All of these things are under the dominion of Venus, and the ancients thought that Venus exercised all of these powers within the fifth month of pregnancy. Within our human souls, Venus is associated with the desiring part of the soul, the part of the soul that desires to fructify, the part of the soul that desires to multiply, and the part of the soul that desires to be in the process of generation. Because once again, through not only the process of generation, but also through observing the generated material that exists within our earth plane, we can see the face of the eternal shining through to all of us, both in the faces of our babies, as well as in the free flowing of the waters, as well as in the flowers within our gardens and the birds and the bees. All of these things that exist within our material plane as creative beings all have the ability to take us back to the eternal.